I think I probably limited myself to answering the question more directly. We'll see. But of course, to answer this question about what should we be doing, or what is to be done, we also need to take apart the question, like the other speakers have done, or the background, the context in which it's being phrased. And I would agree with most of the speakers that the Islamic fundamentalism is essentially a reaction and product of Western imperialism or U.S. imperialism. And U.S. imperialism is also should also be framed in terms of an effort to spread neoliberal globalization. And we have to see it in that context. The third element, though, that is missing, I think, in this background, which we need to also pay attention to, is the fact that there's an ongoing destruction of the environment, leading towards imminent ecological disaster for human life on Earth. We have to keep that in mind as well when we're looking at any kind of solution or what we can do. So rather than focusing on an analysis of the problem, I want to move right on to the next step, which is, well, what can we be doing? Of course, the only solution can be to move forwards. That is, to go beyond both capitalism and fundamentalism. And I'm shortening fundamentalism, the other part, Islamic fundamentalism. I prefer to talk about fundamentalism more in general, because we don't only have fundamentalism in the Middle East, but also in Western countries, and it's actually quite prevalent in the United States, for example, and even in Europe. There are chances that, for example, and when I'm talking about fundamentalism, I mean it in terms of extreme conservatism. For example, in France, there's a good chance that the daughter of Jean Le Pen could possibly win the presidency there. It's unlikely, but it's a distinct possibility. So we have a growth of fundamentalism across Western countries, and we have to see that as I said, as a reaction and a product of capitalist or globalization. So which way? So the only solution can be to move forwards, to go beyond both capitalism and fundamentalism. In which way and how is the big question. In what direction and how are we going to go in that way? The goal, of course, I think has to be to find an alternative to capitalism. How exactly do we define that alternative to capitalism? Well, that's, I think, something we still need to work out. My own personal preference is for something that one could call participatory socialism. It's something that is radically democratic in terms of the polity and also in the economy. That is, it goes beyond market and beyond central planning. However, it should also, of course, incorporate radical social justice and universal solidarity and be ecologically sustainable. I think those are general principles we can all more or less agree on. Maybe not completely, maybe we have some debate on some issues, but those are the general principles. The big question, of course, is going to be, well, what kinds of institutions are going to get us there? That is where the big debate is still to be had, where we don't have clear answers. Again, there's many proposals out there, and I have also my own ideas of what I think would lead us in this direction, what kinds of institutions would lead us there. In my book on Venezuela, I talk about, at the end, I talk about participatory economics as one possibility. Another possibility is the example, I think, that has been tentatively set, only tentatively, in Venezuela, I would say. It's not a very clear alternative, especially in the economic area, but in the political area, there's been efforts to establish an alternative in terms of creating a more direct democracy in Venezuela. So how do we, but then the other question is, how do we get there? What is our path? I would say for that, we definitely need a new kind of organization, a new international movement or organizations that embody and support this kind of goal. But exactly what kind? The big problem in the United States is that, and to some extent it's reflected in other parts of the world, but in the United States is one of the biggest problems, is that progressives in the US are too fragmented to be effective. Every group is working on its own issue independently and on a very narrow framework. So how do we overcome this, this fragmentation in the United States? Well, one of the main things, I think, would be to put aside non-essential differences. That is, to work in broader organizations, coalitions, and groups than ever before. This requires, actually, I think, a cultural shift within the existing organizations and among progressives more generally. That is, to set aside this mindset that most people, most progressives seem to have, that only their struggle or their issue or their group is the one that's most important. We have to reach out and go beyond our particular organizations and our particular issues. This also means to support successful struggles elsewhere around the world, even if they do not correspond with one's own vision of a perfect struggle or movement. Here again, I want to bring up the example of Venezuela, which is something I obviously write a lot about. But I think even though Venezuela might not correspond with our vision of a perfect revolution, it is a struggle that is worth supporting, I would argue, and in the name of creating a more international movement for socialism. The other thing that we'd have to do, I think, another example I want to mention is Bolivia, although it's a little bit more ambiguous, I think, but certainly also worth supporting. The other thing I think we need to do is organize and educate across the usual movement boundaries. That is, first of all, of course, among progressive groups, students, women, labor, immigrant groups, African American groups, organized communities, etc. But also beyond the usual progressive groups, reach out to even, and this might sound like blasphemy, but even reach out to people in the Tea Party movement, for example, which are to some extent people who are confused and who have been misled by the conservative movement. But there are people who are fundamentally disgusted with the direction that things are going, and I think would be amenable towards recruitment, actually. Another group that might seem also beyond the pale for some leftists is this group that sometimes is ambiguously referred to as cultural creatives. That is, there are people, I think even in the middle class, who would be amenable and that we haven't reached out to as progressives. So, in short, progressives need to change their mindset, need to become more open and willing to set aside differences. In short, self-change is actually also necessary, not just changing the larger society. In other words, we need to find a unity between social change and self-change in order to achieve greater movement unity. And another thing I just want to point out to, and even though my time isn't quite up, I just want to conclude with this. There's actually also a new, some people are considering the formation of a new international organization that is being currently supported and promoted by people such as Noam Chomsky, Stanley Aronowitz, David Harvey, Michael Albert, Bill Fletcher, John Pilger, and many other, unknown community activists. And this is being promoted on the website ZNet, or zcommunications.org. If you want to go there, you can take a look at that and look at what the principles are that are being proposed. It's very general, and it's a poll that's being taken, whether or not to see how many people would be interested in such an organization. And it would be good to see. If everybody here, for example, could participate in that, I would really support it. I think it's called zcommunications.org, and take that poll. And if enough people say that they would support it, and so far about 62% of the people who've taken the poll have said that they definitely would pay dues and get involved in such an organization. If enough people do it, and ZNet is one of the largest websites on the left, I would say, in the United States. It reaches over 300,000 people per week. So if enough people answer that question affirmatively, this could actually turn into a powerful movement. Again, this would be a multi-issue organization, and the hope would be that, again, this organization and other organizations could form a coalition by setting aside their differences and by working towards general principles. And this is essentially what I believe people should be doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Well, we promised you a diverse group of thinkers, artists, writers, academics. And the last of our 5 presenters is Wafa Bilal, who teaches